Today, our planet is a thriving green world inhabited by a huge variety of living things. There's life on every continent, including Antarctica, animals and plants, as well as an unimaginable number of fungi and microorganisms live in environments ranging from the most favorable to the harshest. They've adapted to survive at great depths, in mountains, deserts, and ice. To do this, they've had to travel a very long evolutionary path. In this issue, we take you on a journey from the creation of the planet to the Great Permian Extinction. To be the first to know when new videos are released, subscribe to the Age of Dinosaurs channel. You'll learn a lot of interesting things about these amazing creatures, as well as other animals that roamed our planet at different times. Our planet was formed about 4.5 billion years ago, and for most of that time, it was an extremely unfavorable place to live. It took more than 1,200,000,000 years for the first living organism to emerge. And as we know, it was in water. Land remained uninhabitable for a very long time. The first living organisms were unicellular and extremely primitive. It was another 1.7 billion years before multicellular creatures appeared. And they may have disappeared from the face of the Earth many times in the meantime. Scientists have evidence of at least 10 cataclysms that could have interrupted the evolution of life on our planet, and half of these cataclysms occurred when the Earth was inhabited by sufficiently advanced beings. The last such cataclysm occurred just 66 million years ago. It wiped out the dinosaurs and many other creatures. But first things first. For a long time after its creation, our planet was a veritable hell. Its surface was covered in oceans and molten magma. There was no atmosphere, and any kind of life was out of the question. Only after the surface cooled did the gaseous mantle in the world's oceans create the conditions that allowed the first single-celled algae and other microorganisms to appear. The earliest known extinction event occurred at this time, about 2.3 billion years ago. More advanced organisms saturated the water and atmosphere with oxygen to such an extent that they killed off all other life forms. Of course, this didn't happen overnight, but over 200 million years. But the dominance of cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae, in the wildlife of the time played a cruel joke on them. The oxygenated atmosphere not only killed off other forms of life, but also caused the onset of global glaciation. It's true that another version of the planet's transformation into a giant snowball has to do with geology. Many scientists believe that volcanic activity and the movement of lithospheric plates led to a decrease in the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. This caused the Sturt glaciation, also known as Snowball Earth. It's thought that around 700 to 750 million years ago, our planet was completely covered by a layer of ice and snow. Looking at such a world from space, it could be compared to a giant snowball. This period lasted for about 60 million years. Scientists attribute this duration to the reflective properties of ice. Most of the sun's rays were simply reflected off the planet's surface and were unable to warm it properly. The average temperature is thought to have been between -20 and -70 degrees Celsius, depending on the region and time of year. Blue-green algae themselves were able to survive this global cataclysm. Scientists believe that the melting ice shelves created more or less acceptable conditions for their existence. The microorganisms themselves had not changed much since then. They are also a very important part of all evolution on the planet. Today, blue-green algae such as Oscillatoria live in the water. They're no different in structure from the cyanobacteria that lived around 800 million years ago. These microorganisms are considered to be the ancestors of eukaryotes, living organisms with cell nuclei. They were once the most advanced organisms on the planet. They used the revolutionary technology of oxygenic photosynthesis. Unlike the anaerobic fermentation used by their competitors to obtain nutrients, cyanobacteria had an unlimited supply of raw materials. They could easily extract the reagents they needed directly from the water. However, the oxygen they produced turned out to be toxic to most other microorganisms. This led to the ecological catastrophe mentioned above. But this catastrophe was a dramatic boost to evolution. The creatures that were able to survive in the poisonous oxygen atmosphere were those that had learned to produce protective enzymes or had thick cell walls. Even cyanobacteria had to develop such walls. Some scientists even propose an unofficial name for this period: the Cenozoic era. The next step was the appearance of organisms that used oxygen to break down glucose. For example, they invented respiration. This method of degradation also proved to be more efficient and productive. These microorganisms were called proteobacteria. They were responsible for the appearance of mitochondria, the respiratory organelles of eukaryotic cells. Many modern scientists believe that the division of the cell into nucleus and cytoplasm occurred after the fusion of more ancient microorganisms with proteobacteria. This gave rise to eukaryotic cells, which became the prototype of modern cells. One example of ancient proteobacteria is Rhodospirillum, a purple spiral proteobacterium. It's the closest modern relative of mitochondria. This unique microorganism is able to use both respiration, fermentation, and oxygen-free photosynthesis, switching between them depending on environmental conditions. Undoubtedly, the presence of such a symbiont was very useful for the survival of the most ancient microorganisms, as well as for the evolution of more advanced living organisms. The fauna of the Ediacaran period undoubtedly belonged to these more advanced organisms, but towards the end of this period, about 80% of the species became extinct. Until recently, this catastrophe was not considered a mass extinction. Scientists believe that the Ediacaran biota simply gave way to more adapted life forms. However, the term Ediacaran biota is still questioned by many scientists. There's no precise understanding of whether the known organisms of this period should be classified as animals, and not so many remains of these creatures have been found to allow them to be fully studied. Those researchers who are inclined to recognize the animal world of the Ediacaran period as a separate biota divide it into three associations: Avalonian, White Sea, and nanotypes. They're defined by different periods and regions of discovery. The Ediacaran fauna includes a number of marine macroorganisms with radial and sliding symmetry. Many of them were immobile, but recent studies have shown that they're closer to animals than to plants. The Ediacaran itself lasted from 635 to 539 million years ago, but they reached their zenith about 575 million years ago, during the so-called Avalonian explosion. But around 540 to 550 million years ago, traces of life virtually disappear from the sediments of that time. Scientists have proposed a variety of reasons for the Ediacaran extinction. One of the main theories is that oxygen levels in the seawater and atmosphere dropped dramatically. This could have been caused by climatic changes, volcanic activity, and other reasons. This version is supported by the reduction in the number of small creatures and the survival of species with a large surface area. Apparently, it was easier for them to extract oxygen from the water. And then began the Paleozoic era, the first era of the Phanerozoic eon. This eon is also called the time of apparent life. It's explained by the fact that living organisms that emerged in the so-called Cambrian explosion about 500 million years ago acquired a bony skeleton. That's why so many fossils have been preserved in the fossil record. Life may have been no less diverse in the preceding period, the Ediacaran, but scientists have much less evidence of it. The Cambrian period began around 538 million years ago. At this time, all life was concentrated in the water. Most of the landmass was gathered into a single continent, Gondwana. Only small continents were separated from the general mass: Siberia, Baltica, and Laurentia, the basis of modern North America. The average air temperature on the planet was about 22 degrees Celsius. For comparison, this parameter is 14 degrees today. The oxygen content of the atmosphere did not exceed 4% at the beginning of this period. The gradual increase in the proportion of this gas in the composition of the air, according to scientists, led to a sharp increase in the diversity of the Earth's fauna. It was during the Cambrian explosion that the main groups of living things emerged. They were very different from their modern relatives. The seas and oceans of the Cambrian were inhabited by a variety of invertebrates such as worms and centipedes. Coral polyps, cephalopods, arthropods, and the first chordates were also abundant. Sponges were also abundant in the Cambrian fauna. Interestingly, these multicellular creatures may have evolved in their own way from colonies of different microorganisms. Plant life was mainly represented by macroalgae. There were also so-called bacterial mats that lived on shoals and coastal rocks. In fact, they were the first creatures to explore the land, albeit partially. It is thought that at this time, there was a separation of animals that began to hunt other creatures. The most dangerous predator in the Cambrian seas was the Anomalocaris, which we've discussed in previous editions. Many mollusks, arthropods, and chordates also adopted a predatory lifestyle. The next period, the Ordovician, was a natural continuation of the Cambrian. It lasted from 485 to 443 million years ago. Life on the seafloor continued to flourish and evolve. Trilobites, crustaceans, brachiopods, sponges, and many other animal species inhabited the seas and oceans of the Ordovician. Various echinoderms also appeared and occupied their ecological niche: starfish, budgies, lilies, and bubbles. Among the mollusks, we can distinguish a great variety of cephalopods, snails, and bivalves. Strange as it may seem, the top predators of the Ordovician were cephalopods. The underwater inhabitants were also terrorized by jawless vertebrates and, of course, arthropods, Eurypterida and Xiphosaurida. Apparently, some of the arthropods, fleeing from their enemies, began to come ashore for a short time. This was not a full-scale conquest, just the first tentative steps into a new element, but the plants of the time had already successfully colonized the coastal strip and were actively colonizing further away from the surf line. But further land expansion was halted by another mass extinction. At the boundary between the Ordovician and Silurian periods, the seas and oceans were virtually emptied. Scientists estimate that around 60% of all life disappeared during these two extinction events. There's still no consensus on the causes of this extinction. Among the most likely possibilities is a gamma-ray burst that occurred in space near the Earth. There are also suggestions that the mass death of animals and plants could have been caused by increased volcanic activity or soil erosion with the release of various gases. The Silurian period lasted only 25 million years, but in that short time, life finally arrived on land. Coastal areas were covered with a dense carpet of mosses, lichens, and fungi. Higher plants, the rhiniophytes, also appeared, and after them, various species of arthropods began to live on land: mosses, centipedes, mites, and scorpions. At the same time, life continued to evolve in the seas and oceans, although it was not as diverse as at the time of the Cambrian explosion. Various corals and sea lilies lived on the bottom, as did mollusks, brachiopods, and ostracods. It was also at this time that the true-jawed fish, the acanthodes, appeared. It seems that the ancestors of the acanthodians appeared in the Devonian, and they were exclusively marine animals. Silurian jawed fishes also lived in freshwater. They probably fed on plankton. The largest representatives of this class reached a length of 2.5 meters. The end of this period also saw the first ray-finned fishes. The largest of these reached a length of 1 meter, and they may have been the first vertebrates that preferred to hunt other vertebrates. The Silurian period was followed by the Devonian period, which began about 419 million years ago and lasted about 60 million years. This period is sometimes called the Age of Fish. It was during the Devonian period that the placoderms appeared. They occupied almost every body of water on the planet. Sarcoptera G also appeared, giving rise to the first vertebrates to walk on land. The giant Eurypteridae occupied the bottom of the world's oceans. Perhaps the widespread distribution of these predators led to the gradual disappearance of trilobites. In the Carboniferous period that followed, the whole planet was covered with endless forests. But ferns and other primitive plants took the place of modern trees. Thanks to them, huge coal deposits appeared, giving the period its name. Among the achievements of evolution, the appearance of four-legged animals with five-toed limbs and the division of the synapsids and sauropsida are worth mentioning. The former became the ancestors of mammals, while the latter gave rise to birds and reptiles. The conflict between these different types of quadrupeds intensified during the Permian period. The last period of the Paleozoic. We've told you about the predatory Gorgonops and the hippopotamus-like Estamenosicus, as well as other animals in our videos on the Age of Dinosaurs channel. But the greatest extinction in the history of the planet didn't allow them to conquer their evolutionary path. This gave the opportunity for new players to develop and take over the planet, dinosaurs and their relatives. Our new issue is dedicated to the fauna of the Devonian period. This period is often referred to as the Age of Fish. This name reflects the reality. Although life had already begun to actively conquer the land during the Devonian period, most animals were still underwater. Towards the end of the period, however, the most important event in evolution took place. The first vertebrates came out of the water onto the land. Today, we're going to talk about the stages that preceded this event, the versions given by different scientists, and get to know some of the inhabitants of the seas and oceans of the Age of Fish. Subscribe to our channel. This will allow you to be the first to know about the release of new videos about the Age of Dinosaurs and other periods in the evolution of life on our planet. Also, our viewers can help promote the channel with likes and comments. The Devonian period began about 419 million years ago and lasted for almost 60 million years. Together with the next period, the Carboniferous, it is the longest of the Paleozoic. The period was named in honor of the English county of Devonshire, where the first geological strata associated with the Age of Fish were discovered. Devon was identified as a separate period by the explorers Roderick Murchison and Adam Sedgwick in 1839. During the Devonian period, the first planas, ferns and horsetails appeared on land from primitive plants, rhinophytes, and towards the end of the period, the first holoderms appeared. Thanks to them, soil began to form on the Earth's surface. The plants described above formed huge forests, which became the dominant ecosystem on the planet. Gradually, these forests were colonized first by insects and spiders, and then by the first land vertebrates. In the Carboniferous period that followed, the trunks of giant ferns and other primitive plants began to form coal deposits, which mankind has mined for centuries. The formation of these minerals was due to the lack of microorganisms capable of processing the remains of arboreal plants. Also during the Devonian period, kimberlite pipes were formed in various parts of the world, which became the source of diamonds and other precious stones that are mined today. Their formation is linked to certain processes that took place inside the planet. The composition of Devon's atmosphere was very different from the air we're used to. It contained no more than 15% oxygen at the beginning of the period, and no more than 18% at the end. By comparison, the Earth's atmosphere today contains about 21% of the gas most important to us. The amount of carbon dioxide has fallen from 6 to 4.5%. This concentration is almost lethal to us. Therefore, modern man could not have lived during the Devonian period. The air temperature at the beginning of the Devonian was about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius higher than today and averaged about 20 degrees Celsius. The spread of plants caused this to drop to 18 degrees Celsius in the middle of the period and gradually rise to 22 degrees Celsius towards the end. But even then, the climate was not the same in different parts of the planet. For example, there was a glacier in what is now Brazil, but the future Brazil itself was much closer to the pole than it is today. As forests of giant ferns, horsetails, planas, and hollow dwarfs spread across the Devonian landmass, they were invaded by the few land animals of the time. One of the first to conquer the land were arachnids, or spiders. They came out of the water in the Ordovician. By the early Devonian, these creatures were among the most advanced land dwellers. They were followed by centipedes in the Silurian, and it was in the Devonian that the most abundant animals to date appeared. We're talking about insects, of course. The very first members of this class resembled modern cockroaches. They were all herbivores, and their evolution was inextricably linked to that of plants. Later, some insect species switched to a predatory lifestyle. Also in Devon, the first conquerors of the air appeared among the insects. These were the ancestors of modern dragonflies. Later, other insects acquired the handy device of wings. Some of the earliest land dwellers were arachnids, also known as spiders. Devonian forests were inhabited by such relatives of modern spiders as trigonotarbs. They're also known as shell spiders. Scientists have described more than 70 species of these creatures, which lived on land from the end of the Silurian to the beginning of the Permian. Their remains can be found almost everywhere in Europe, as well as in the United States and Canada. Some of them show evidence of glands for the production of webs. In general, trigonotarches resemble their modern relatives in many ways. However, no species of venomous trigonotary spider has yet been discovered. Another interesting inhabitant of the Devonian were the giant fungi, prototaxids. At present, 12 species of these fungi are known, ranging in age from the late Ordovician to the end of the Devonian. They're found in Western Europe and North America. The first fossils of these unusual organisms were thought by scientists to be the remains of coniferous trees, hence their name, which means first use. It is thought that these cone-shaped fungi had a base up to 94 inches in diameter and grew up to 30 feet tall. Scientists believed that the prototaxids towered over the Devonian jungle and were the largest terrestrial organisms of their time. Because of the high air temperature, the sea level was quite high. The whole planet was covered by a network of small, warm water seas. As temperatures rose towards the end of the Devonian, the climate became drier. It was also affected by the constant movement of the continents. Because of these features, almost all of the fauna of the time was concentrated in the water. The most advanced creatures of the underwater world were a wide variety of fish, from the gradually extinct clams to the ancestors of the first amphibians, the sarcopterygians. There was little competition from arthropods and mollusks. During the Devonian period, one of the most common classes of fish was the placoderms, or plastids. The name clams was once common. They already appeared at the beginning of the previous Silurian period. The Devonian period was their golden age, but by the end of the Devonian, the plastids began to die out, giving way to other classes of fish that came from different species of the same placoderms. Scientists rejected the name shellfish because it did not reflect the principle of the structure of their protective cover. The so-called shell of these fishes is not a horny shield, but a series of plates covered with a layer of skin. The most famous representative of placoderms is a 33-foot predatory fish, Dunkleosteus. We've reported on it several times in our previous editions. This giant was probably at the top of the food pyramid, but there were many other no less interesting creatures among the plastids. One such example is the bottom-dwelling fishes of the genus Homosteus. Their remains, dating back to the middle of the Devonian period, have been found in Canada, Estonia, Greenland, and several other European countries. Among them were both real giants and very tiny creatures. According to some estimates, the largest Homosteus species reached a length of about 30 feet. The size of their head plates reached 3 feet, and similar plates in the smallest Arctic species are only 6 inches long. Judging by the structure of these plate-skinned fish, they lived in the bottom layers and fed on plankton. Holosteus had flattened heads with eyes pointing upwards. This suggests that Holosteus fed on small marine animals and filtered the water near the bottom. Filter feeders of the genus Titanichthyes lived in the seas of modern Morocco and the USA. Their maximum length could exceed 20 meters. Outwardly, these clams resembled their relatives, Dunkleosteus. However, the jaws of Titanichthyes did not have sharp cutting plates to act as teeth. It's likely that these giants filtered water with special plates, just as modern whales do. Another characteristic of this genus of platy-skinned fish was large pectoral fins. Scientists believe that Titanichthyes used them to keep its body balanced while feeding. In 2012, an important discovery was made in southern China that sheds light on the evolution of jawed fishes. The remains of a small fish, later named Entolognithus, were found in layers dating from the late Silurian to early Devonian. It means full jaw. The fish did not exceed 8 centimeters in length. In some respects, it could be classified as a placoderm. However, the jaw structure of Entolognithus is closer to that of modern bony fishes. By studying the body structure of this ancient fish, scientists have suggested that Entolognithus and similar creatures may have been common ancestors of both bony and platy-skinned fishes. These common ancestors were probably more closely related to the bony fishes. The cartilaginous fishes and acanthodians, on the other hand, evolved their skeletons and skins in completely different ways. In the late Devonian, another genus of placoderms, Bothriolopus, became widespread. Fossils of more than 100 species of these shells have been found all over the world, from Antarctica to Greenland. No species of Bothriolopus that lived in what is now Africa has been described. The largest species of these fishes reached 3 meters in length, but the average size did not exceed 1 meter. Like most plastids, they fed on plankton. During the Devonian period, cartilaginous fish, the ancestors of modern sharks and rays, were also actively evolving. The proto-sharks of the time could not compete on equal terms with such monsters as Dunkleosteus. These underwater predators were not yet perfect killing machines. Members of the class such as Cladocelache, Stegotanths, or the recently discovered Cosmoselacia were relatively small and structurally different from modern sharks. Read more about the evolution of these marine predators in one of our previous editions. The Devonian marine fauna was also characterized by a large number of jawless animals. Today, only lampreys remain of their related species, and in the Paleozoic, 3 groups of jawless animals actively developed and flourished: Anaspids, Heterostraci, Osteostraci. Scientists believe that anaspids are the ancestors of roundworms. They got their name because their exoskeletons were much weaker than those of other jawless animals. These creatures reached 10 centimeters in length, swam actively, and fed on plankton. Heterostracans appeared at the end of the Cambrian period and did not disappear until the end of the Devonian period. Their remains, ranging from a few centimeters to 3 meters in length, are found throughout northern Europe and North America. The head and front part of the broad and flat body of Heterostracans were protected by a bony armor. The shields of this armor were made of acellular bone tissue, aspidine. These creatures used gill sacs to breathe. They had a single fin on their tail. They were probably sedentary. They are thought to have been Heterostracans, the ancestors of the jawfish. A distinctive external feature of the bony fishes was a structure that served to protect the head. This head shield was partially attached to the animal's internal skeleton. It's thought that this structure was mobile and resembled a kind of bone mosaic. This leads scientists to believe that Osteostracans were good swimmers and actively moved in the water column. This is supported by the presence of paired pectoral fins, a caudal fin, and a powerful mobile tail. Later members of this group had less powerful bony defenses. The Devonian seas and oceans were also home to large numbers of arthropods of all kinds. One of them was a small crustacean, Clavofabellina. Their body length did not exceed 1 centimeter. They lived on the surface of the ground. Representatives of this genus of crustaceans in the Middle Devonian were widespread in Eastern Europe and Russia. They had shells in the shape of a truncated oval with a beveled rear edge. But perhaps the most interesting for science are the Sarcopterygii. Their descendants were the first vertebrates to walk on land. In fact, all modern mammals, including humans, evolved from Sarcopterygii. But in the distant Devonian period, not all Sarcopterygians were eager to grow legs and walk on solid ground. Among them were those that became the top underwater protectors of their region. An example of such a creature is the Haineria. The body length of this fish could reach 15 feet, and such giants could weigh up to 2 tons. The remains of the largest Sarcopterygii were found in the state of Pennsylvania in the United States, and it got its name from the name of the settlement where it was found. At this size and with sufficiently strong jaws, Haineria could well have fed on primitive Devonian sharks and other large fish, as well as amphibians such as stegocephalans that appeared in the late Devonian. The name stegocephalans itself is outdated. It was used in the 18th and 19th centuries to describe the first amphibians. This class is now considered extinct, and for its more accurate designation, the term Labyrinthodontia is used. It's associated with the characteristics of the structure of the teeth of these primitive amphibians. The various families of this class include animals such as Acanthostega and Tiktaalik. Such creatures clearly show how fishes were transformed into quadrupeds during the course of evolution. Although Tiktaalik is a labyrinthodont, it's a lobster-like fish. Its structure combines features of both amphibians and fish. It could breathe with both gills and lungs. Its body was covered with scales, and its fins had not yet developed into full legs. But Acanthostega's paws already had toes, up to 8 on each limb. The paws of these creatures had no wrists. This suggests an extremely poor adaptation for locomotion on land. But you couldn't really call Acanthostega a fish. It's the most genuine transitional form, from Sarcopterygians to amphibians. To find out more about how fish began to conquer the land, watch our video on the subject. What do most people know about the Carboniferous period? For one, it's the time when massive underground coal deposits were formed. But it's also remembered as the Age of Giant Insects. Yet the Carboniferous, or Coal Age, was much more than just a time of towering bugs. It was a period of intense geological activity and an explosion of diverse life forms. In today's episode, we'll explore how coal basins were formed, why insects reached such enormous sizes, and how food chains worked during this strange and fascinating chapter in Earth's history. Subscribe to the Age of Dinosaurs channel to stay updated on our newest videos about the history of life on Earth. Don't forget to like and leave comments to support our team and help grow the community. The Carboniferous period began around 359 million years ago and ended approximately 299 million years ago. Over those 60 million years, life made huge strides. For the first time, animals had fully colonized land. Tetrapods, 4-limbed vertebrates, developed 5-toed limbs and diversified into distinct groups. Meanwhile, tectonic plate movement continued, slowly pushing the continents together into a single massive landmass known as Pangaea, the supercontinent that would eventually split into all the continents we know today. To the east, a new ocean called Tethys began to form, while in the west, the Rheic Ocean disappeared as the continents of Gondwana and Laurasia collided. At the start of the Carboniferous, global sea levels were high, and much of the land was submerged under shallow seas. But by the middle of the period, Earth's climate began to change, leading to the formation of a large ice sheet over the southern regions of Gondwana, near the South Pole. One of the most striking features of this time was the Earth's atmosphere. For much of the Carboniferous, oxygen levels were around 35%, significantly higher than today's 21%. Scientists believe this surplus of oxygen was due to the vast amounts of plant matter that didn't decompose. Ancient tree-like plants would die, but instead of breaking down, they would become buried in swampy soils, trapping carbon dioxide and forming thick layers of peat and coal. This odd process happened because fungi and microbes hadn't yet developed the enzymes to break down lignin, a tough component of plant cell walls. These enzymes only started appearing toward the end of the period. During most of the Carboniferous, nearly all of the land surface was blanketed in dense forests. Like in the preceding Devonian period, these forests were primarily composed of massive ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. This was also when gymnosperms, cone-bearing plants like early conifers, chordate, and cycads began to thrive. By the middle of the period, spore-bearing plants were widespread. Since these plants no longer needed water to reproduce, they could spread into drier inland areas, far from oceans and freshwater sources. But life wasn't only exploding on land. The Carboniferous also saw a boom in marine biodiversity. One prime example is a group of single-celled organisms known as fusulinids, a type of foraminifera. These tiny creatures, usually less than a centimeter in size, lived either in the ocean floor or as plankton. Over time, their spiraled, multi-chambered shells accumulated to form thick limestone deposits, many of which are still mined today. Also prominent in Carboniferous seas were colonial creatures known as tabulates and heteractinids. Tabulates were early corals, while heteractinids were once mistaken for sponges. Both are now extinct. Tabulate corals formed colonies that could cover up to 150 square centimeters. Each individual corallite was less than a centimeter across and came in a variety of shapes, tubular, prismatic, or curved, depending on the species. These corals often grew so close together that their colonies resembled tightly packed chains. Heteractinid colonies were made up of delicate hair-like tubes no wider than a millimeter. These calcium-based tubes fused together into larger, complex structures ranging from flat plates to domes with knobby protrusions. Some colonies even had denser, wrinkled layers along their edges. Among mollusks, gastropods, snail-like creatures, and cephalopods such as nautiloids flourished. The ocean floor also hosted bryozoans, brachiopods, and echinoderms like sea urchins, crinoids, sea lilies, and starfish. As for top ocean predators, the Carboniferous marked the rise of cartilaginous fishes, particularly sharks, and a now extinct group called the brachiodonts. Unfortunately, fossil evidence is scarce due to the cartilage-based skeletons of these animals, but their teeth remain. One shark, Campodus, likely reached up to 43 feet, or 13 meters in length, based on the size of its teeth alone. Brachiodonts were widespread across Europe until the end of the Permian period, and fossils have also been found in North America and Australia. Their broad, flattened teeth were perfect for crushing the shells of mollusks, their presumed primary food source. Scientists believe these fish had wide, flat bodies similar to modern-day rays. Though extinct now, brachiodonts are considered distant relatives of chimeras, the ghost sharks of today. In freshwater environments, apex predators were often lobe-finned fishes from the rhizodont family. These giants could grow 20 to 23 feet long, 6 to 7 meters, and weigh 2 to 3 tons, making them the largest known freshwater fish in Earth's history. They had elongated bodies that tapered toward the tail, with fins positioned near the rear. Their powerful tail fins gave them speed and agility, ideal for ambushes in swampy waters. Fossils have been found in regions that are now Russia, the US, and the UK. However, these fish weren't the only freshwater predators. Large reptiliomorphs, a transitional group between amphibians and reptiles, also vied for dominance. One of the most impressive was Eogeranus, also known as Erogenus athei, or Philadelphidin. Its build and lifestyle likely resembled that of modern crocodiles. This predator could grow up to 15 feet long, 4.5 meters, and weigh over half a ton. With a vertically flattened tail, Eogeranus was a powerful swimmer and likely hunted both fish and amphibians along the shores. Despite its size, Eogeranus still retained many amphibian traits. It couldn't venture far from water, but that didn't stop it from ambushing prey at the water's edge. To date, scientists have identified 2 distinct species of this genus, one found in Canada, the other in Scotland. These ancient creatures lasted until the end of the Permian period. Of course, not all amphibians of the Carboniferous were giants. Some were actually quite small, like the Brachiosaurus, not to be confused with the much later sauropod dinosaur, Brachiosaurus. These salamander-like creatures rarely exceeded 4 to 6 inches, or 10 to 15 centimeters in length. They had wide heads, elongated, flattened bodies, long tails, and short limbs. Their larvae were fully aquatic and breathed through external gills, while adults developed functioning lungs. Toward the end of the Carboniferous, a new group of tetrapods emerged, the lepospondals. Some paleontologists believe these so-called thin-spined creatures went extinct by the close of the Permian. Others argue they were the ancestors of modern amphibians, or at least the limbless ones. The lepospondals were a varied bunch, ranging from small insectivores to large aquatic predators. The first group included animals like Sauroplora, also known as Cenozoic. These small, newt-like creatures lived in Europe and North America and resembled modern salamanders. The largest of the lepospondals were Diplocalices, highly unusual creatures with boomerang-shaped heads. Adults grew to about 3 feet, or 1 meter long, and had wide, flattened bodies that suggest a bottom-dwelling lifestyle. Scientists are still debating the purpose of their distinctive skull shape. The name Diplocalis means double-fold, referring to the large extensions that protruded from either side of its skull. Some researchers believe these helped it swim by providing horizontal stability in the water. Wind tunnel simulations support this idea, showing the head shape could help keep the skull at the surface. Others think these extensions were a result of sexual dimorphism, helping animals attract mates. Still, others suggest the skull was for defense, but that theory's weakened by fossil evidence. Remains of Diplocalis have been found in the stomach contents and nesting sites of predators, like Dimetrodon. It seems these strange amphibians were often easy prey, especially during droughts, when they'd bury themselves in mud to survive. Among the first fully land-adapted tetrapods of the Carboniferous was Peterpes. These primitive amphibians lived in what is now Scotland during the early Carboniferous. They descended from lobe-finned fish, like Acanthostega, which we discussed in an earlier episode. But unlike their aquatic ancestors, Peterpes had true limbs, proper feet and toes. Interestingly, the nearly complete skeleton of Peterpes was discovered back in 1971, but it was initially misclassified as a fish. It wasn't until 2002 that researchers re-identified it as an early tetrapod. The discovery helped fill a major evolutionary gap between Devonian lobe-finned fish and fully terrestrial vertebrates. The only known specimen was about 3 feet or 1 meter long, considered a medium-sized individual. It had a narrow skull and breathed air using lungs. However, its inner ear structure still suggests it spent a lot of time underwater. A possible relative of Peterpes was Wachiria, a tetrapod that lived in what is now the United States around 340 million years ago. Discovered in 1995, this animal measured about 3 feet long and 16 inches tall, 1 meter by 40 centimeters. It was still quite primitive, retaining the lateral line system used by fish to detect vibrations in water. It had a pointed snout and a smooth, deep skull. Scientists believe Wucheria led a semi-aquatic lifestyle. Its young were fully aquatic, but adults spent much of their time on land, returning to water only to hunt or breed. One of the later Carboniferous tetrapods was West Lothiana, a small predator named after the West Lothian region in Scotland, where its remains were found. This creature was just 8 to 12 inches long, 20 to 30 centimeters, and lived along the shores of freshwater swamps, feeding on smaller animals. What's most intriguing about West Lothiana is that scientists still can't definitively classify it as either an amphibian or a reptile. It appears to be a transitional form, something in between. But the real terror of the Carboniferous wasn't a fish or an amphibian. The dominant predators on land were insects, and they were gigantic. We've talked before about monsters like Arthropleura, the multi-legged giant millipede, and Meganora, the dragonfly with a wingspan of over 2.5 feet, or 75 centimeters. But the Carboniferous also produced many other bizarre and oversized arthropods. In 1994, paleontologists in Scotland discovered the fossil remains of the largest known scorpion ever to exist, Pulmonoscorpius. Its name literally means breathing scorpion. Most individuals were between 0.5 and 9 inches, 13 to 230 millimeters long, but one fossilized segment suggests some individuals could grow up to 28 inches, or 70 centimeters. Another impressive predator was Megarachne, whose name means giant spider. When it was first described in 1980, scientists thought it was an enormous arachnid. Later analysis, however, revealed it was actually a eurypterid, a sea scorpion. This ancient arthropod grew up to 20 inches or 50 centimeters long and likely lived both in water and on land. It preyed on invertebrates and early reptiles. Of course, Earth still has some large arthropods today, such as king crabs and horseshoe crabs, which first appeared back in the Devonian. But these modern giants are aquatic. The enormous size of their Carboniferous cousins on land is believed to be linked to the high oxygen levels of that time. Because insects breathe through a system of internal tubes called tracheae, the oxygen-rich atmosphere would have allowed their muscles to metabolize more energy, supporting larger body sizes. Some scientists also believe these insects had few natural enemies. Birds didn't exist yet, and there were few, if any, predators capable of taking down monsters, like Meganora. That may explain why they dominated terrestrial ecosystems. This brings us to a fascinating twist in Carboniferous food chains. If we scale up the dietary needs of a modern dragonfly to the size of Meganora, each individual would require nearly a pound or 500 grams of meat per day, about the same daily protein intake as an average adult man. But there weren't many herbivorous insects back then. The dominant plants of the time, horsetails, ferns, and club mosses, had tissues that were tough and nutrient-poor. Most animals didn't bother eating them, so if Meganora and its larvae fed on smaller insects, those insects too must have been carnivorous. In other words, the Carboniferous food pyramid was flipped upside down compared to today. It's very likely that giant predatory insects fed not just on other bugs, but also on vulnerable amphibians and the earliest reptiles. Back then, it wasn't frogs eating flies. It was the other way around. Insects were the ones stalking and devouring the ancestors of modern frogs and lizards. Until a certain time, there were no living organisms on Earth that ate other animals. But after the division into conditional herbivores and carnivores, an endless arms race began. Predators grew teeth and claws, and their potential victims acquired armor and other means of protection. With today's video, we open a series of videos about the main confrontations of various geological eras. and we'll begin our story with the battles of animals of the Permian period. If you want to be the first to know about the release of new videos on the Dinosaur Age channel, we advise you to subscribe to it. We also encourage all our viewers to more actively express their opinions about our work in the comments, and mark the videos you like with likes. These actions not only help promote our videos, but also allow as many people as possible to see them. The Permian period lasted from about 298 to 252 million years ago. Shortly before its beginning, the two giant continents of Laurasia and Gondwana merged into a single Pangaea. This supercontinent stretched almost from pole to pole and was washed by the Panthalassa Ocean, which occupied about 70% of the entire surface of our planet. At the junction of the Carboniferous and Permian periods, the climate on the planet became much colder. Snowcaps began to form at the poles, and if in the Carboniferous, mainly heat-loving amphibians prevailed, then in the Permian period, they had to make room significantly. The so-called therapsids, something between reptiles and mammals, came to the leading positions on land. It's quite difficult to talk about real battles between animals of that time. Something similar to a serious confrontation between carnivores and herbivores appeared closer to the end of the Paleozoic era, and then mainly on land, the era was then dominated exclusively by insects, and the seas were inhabited by various species of primitive fish, as well as corals, sponges, and mollusks. The inhabitants of the land were very slow. Their battles were long and unhurried. The development of various qualities that strengthened the confrontation between predators and herbivores was prevented by another mass extinction. Moreover, the Permian extinction was the largest in the entire history of life on our planet. But still, some confrontations that took place in different elements deserve a separate mention in our video. Truly large flying creatures had not yet appeared in the Permian period. Therefore, it's difficult to come up with a plot for a dramatic and harsh confrontation in this element. But pioneers in this area first appeared among the Permian reptiles. We're talking about representatives of the Weigaltiorid family. These small animals lived almost all over the world. They cannot yet fly fully, but had already mastered gliding well. It's believed that they came to this method of moving in space due to their habitats. The Permian period is characterized by the presence of forests with tall trees. Weigaltosauruses, which fed on insects, acquired an extremely unusual adaptation for the convenience of hunting their prey. They used leathery membranes on the sides of their bodies as wings for gliding flight. The basis for such wings were hollow, bony processes, sometimes called false ribs. Fossils associated with different species of this family are found from Madagascar to central Russia. It's difficult to say which types of insects were the main prey of the Weigaltosauruses, but it's safe to say that insects emerged victorious from this confrontation. The descendants of many of them still inhabit our planet today, but the hovering reptiles of this type completely disappeared in the Triassic period of the Mesozoic era. Among the most famous flying insects of the Permian period, scorpion flies stand out. Today, science knows more than 760 species of these insects, and about 370 of them are fossils. One of the earliest species of these flies with a sting like a scorpion was found in the Permian deposits. Also, until recently, it was believed that the beetles of the Permian period were much more primitive than they are now. Most of the representatives of this class of insects were actually very different from the beetles we're used to. They lived mainly in the forest litter and bark of coniferous trees. They had elytra that were not completely hardened and were covered with characteristic tubercles. But in 2017, a new species of beetle was described in Australia, called Ponemerinkia, or Ponemerinkia belmonhensis. Australian scientists have named a new genus, as well as a family of beetles, in honor of the Russian paleoentomologist Alexander Georgievich Ponomarenko. Compared to other beetles over 300 million years old, it looks very progressive. Its body length didn't exceed 1.5 centimeters. The elytra of this beetle are already completely hard. There are also thread-like antennae. Its body is completely smooth, and its thoracic segments are almost identical to similar parts of the body of modern beetles. But at the same time, some features of its structure remain primitive. This did not allow researchers to classify Ponomarenkia to any of the modern suborders. It's believed that this beetle owes this body structure to a change in its lifestyle. It began to develop more open spaces, getting out from under the cover of tree bark. At the same time, these insects continued to live mainly on trees. The main inhabitants of the Permian seas were mollusks, sponges, and corals. In freshwater bodies, there were still sea scorpions that had given up their leading positions. But the most interesting for us are the primitive fish of that time. Among invertebrates, it's rather difficult to talk about any serious competition. But in the seas and oceans of the Permian period, there were two main groups of cephalopods, ammonites and nautiluses. These creatures differed in structure and lifestyle, but only nautiluses have survived to our time. Ammonites died out at the border of the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods along with dinosaurs. Oddly enough, ammonites were more developed from an evolutionary point of view. They appeared earlier and were more diverse. Complex shells with curved partitions, a progressive muscular system, and other adaptations made ammonites the dominant group of cephalopods of their time. Among the deposits of the Paleozoic and Mesozoic, their shells with a diameter of more than 1 meter are found. But nautiluses had one important difference. They hatched from the egg with shells measuring from 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters, whereas newborn ammonites were about 10 times smaller. Young nautiluses could immediately feed on the same food as adults: fish, crustaceans, and carrion. And ammonites lived in the surface layers of water for the first time in their lives and fed on plankton. And they themselves led the life of plankton. Climate change caused by the fall of a giant asteroid caused the extinction of the main food of ammonites and the mollusks themselves. Since the Devonian period, a large number of species of cartilaginous fish lived in the seas in freshwater bodies, the ancestors of modern sharks, rays, and chimeras. They were divided into two groups, Ctenocanthus and Xenocanthus. It's believed that real sharks originated from Ctenocanthus, but in the Permian period, they did not much resemble the formidable predators of modern seas and oceans. Fossilized remains of these predominantly predatory fish are found in deposits aged 407 to 201 million years. They grew up to 6 meters in length. It's interesting that the teeth of the Ctenocanthus were located not only in the mouth, but also outside the oral cavity. In general, not much is known about them. It's safe to say that they were widespread. Most likely during the hunt, they first rammed their prey, and then tore it apart with their teeth. Xenocanths were much smaller. They did not grow more than 2 meters, and lived mainly in freshwater bodies. Their distinctive feature was a dorsal spine located in the back of the head. Some scientists suggest that it could be poisonous. Xenocanths died out only at the end of the Triassic period. Most likely, it was the fish from this group that served as the main food for early pelycosaurs, such as Dimetrodon. The most famous fish of the Permian period is undoubtedly Helicoprion. This group of fish, similar in appearance to sharks, were distinguished by a unique structure of the lower jaw. It had a spiral shape and most likely served to saw the shells of ammonites and other cephalopods. Also among the inhabitants of the reservoirs of the Permian period, one can distinguish such a group of fish as acanthodians. These ancestors of bony fish lived almost all over the world. Their main distinguishing feature was the presence of a large number of fins. Scientists count 6 to 7 pairs in some of them. In the process of evolution, some of the fins turned into sharp spines. Among the acanthodians, there were both active predators and lovers of plankton or plant food. Undoubtedly, the most important aquatic species for us of that time can be considered lobe-finned fish. After all, it was the representatives of this group that earlier emerged from the aquatic environment, and through a long evolutionary chain, essentially became our ancestors. Today, the only representatives of this group live in the seas, coelacanths. But it's time to move to land. Here, by the end of the Permian period, the arms race was in full swing. If the early land synapsids, pelycosaurs, were more likely reptiles, then the later and more developed therapsids were in many ways similar to modern mammals. These animals are distinguished by a dorsal sail, which probably served for thermoregulation. All pelycosaurs known today were predators. They hunted smaller animals and fish. A typical representative of this group of synapsids was Dimetrodon. Previously, scientists classified it as a reptile, but later it turned out that Dimetrodon, like other pelycosaurs, are very different from them. Although there are quite a few similar features in the appearance of these groups of animals, Dimetrodon lived in Germany, the USA, and possibly Canada, Russia, and South America. They grew up to 2.5 to 4 meters in length and up to 2 meters in height. These animals weighed from 200 to 250 kilograms. Different species of Dimetrodon had different types of teeth depending on their size and lifestyle. Some had small, sharp teeth adapted for catching fish, while others had teeth reminiscent of sharks. There are currently 20 known species of Dimetrodon. Initially, it was assumed that these animals moved like modern lizards, but later, fossilized tracks were discovered indicating that their legs were straighter when walking. Towards the end of the period, the division of synapsids and the therapsids that separated from them became more pronounced. The most developed group of predators were Gorgonopsians. This large group included animals of different sizes, from 1.5 to 4 meters. All of them were saber-toothed and possibly pack animals. Among the herbivores, the most well-known species to the general public are Estemanosikians, Lystrosaurus, and Parasaurs. Estemanosikians were large therapsids, similar to a hippopotamus. The body length of these herbivorous giants could reach 4 meters. They were distinguished by a skull with large growths, which gave the animal's head a very weird shape. Perhaps these growths served to attract the opposite sex or were useful in battles for females. The smaller Lystrosaurus also belonged to therapsids. They were able to survive the Great Permian extinction and disappeared only in the Triassic period. Their height did not exceed 40 centimeters, and in length they grew up to 2 to 2.5 meters. But Parasaurs were real, albeit primitive reptiles. Depending on the species, they could grow up to 2.5 to 4 meters in length and weigh up to 700 kilograms. In the deposits, due to which the period was called Permian, there are remains of such a representative of Parasaurs as Scutosaurs. We've chosen it to clearly illustrate the battles between herbivores and carnivores of that time. The Scutosaurus could grow up to 3.5 meters. Their body in the most vulnerable places was protected by bony growths. They were short and stocky. The skull of the Scutosaurus was powerful and wide. Judging by the reconstructions, it resembled slow hippos and led a similar lifestyle. At the same time and in the same territory lived one of the most famous Gorgonopsians, Innistronyavia. It's considered the first giant land predator in the history of the planet. The body length of Innistronyavia reached 3.5 meters and the height 120 centimeters. The narrow, elongated skull, up to 60 centimeters long, ended in a mouth with huge fangs. It's also possible that these predators lived in small groups. It's a stretch to call Innistronyvia's hunt for Scutosaurus a battle. The fact is that the animals of the Permian period were quite slow. Gorgonopsians, of course, as befits active predators, moved a little faster than their prey, but their movement can hardly be called very fast either. Most likely, Inostraniavia approached a Scutosaurus peacefully grazing near a pond or in shallow water and inflicted a serious wound. The Scutosaurus began to slowly move away from danger, losing a lot of blood and receiving new wounds. Then the victim lost strength and could no longer resist. Then the predator could calmly finish it off and eat it. The Permian extinction put an end to this round of the arms race in the animal world. In many characteristics, late therapsids were close to mammals. They were already covered in fur. They also developed a way of feeding their young with milk through glands on the skin. Such a mechanism is now found in primitive mammals, such as the platypus. Further development of these animals could have led to more vivid and dramatic confrontations between predators and their victims. If not for another catastrophe of a planetary scale, neither dinosaurs nor especially mammals would have had any chance of dominance. But the history of life on the planet took such a path that the heroes of the most vivid confrontations in the animal world were not the rhapsids, but reptiles and then mammals. We'll talk about these battles in the next episodes, and the fauna of the Permian period simply set the general trends for the development of such confrontations, giving scientists and science lovers around the world a huge amount of material for studying the evolution of species. This time, as part of the series about the main battles between animals of different eras, we'll talk about the Triassic period. This period was the first in the Mesozoic area, the era of the dominance of dinosaurs. In it, the evolutionary arms race unfolded more vividly than in previous geological eras. The first lizards appeared in the air, on land, and in the oceans, some of which were predatory, others herbivores. The former actively hunted the latter and at the same time competed with each other for the upper steps of the food pyramid. In this issue, we'll try to highlight the most interesting and dramatic confrontations of this time. Subscribe to our channel, and that way you'll be the first to know when we post new videos. We also encourage our viewers to actively share their opinions about the work of the channel creators and support us with likes. This allows our videos to be promoted across the platform and give the opportunity to other science lovers around the world to see them. The Triassic period began approximately 251 million years ago and lasted for almost 50 million years. At the very beginning, a type of lizards called archosaurs appeared. But by the end of the period, real dinosaurs and the first pterosaurs appeared. The end of this period was marked by another mass extinction. It, of course, was not as large as the previous one, the Permian. But even at the border of the Triassic and Jurassic periods, many species of living creatures disappeared from the face of the Earth. The Triassic period was divided into only 2 seasons. The first was dry and hot, and the second was wet. During the dry half of the year, reservoirs dried up and many areas turned into real deserts. The second half of the year, the earth was flooded with constant rains. Nature flourished. Dense thickets appeared around reservoirs. Among the plants, gymnosperms predominated. These were mainly conifers, cycads, and ginkgo. A large number of new species of ferns also appeared. New species of foraminifera, single-celled amoeba-like creatures placed in a shell, appeared in the seas of the Triassic. 6-rayed and reliable 8-rayed corals also appeared. Shark-like and whole-bone ray-fin fish began to predominate among fish. Also, unique lizards called Pachypleurosaurus could also be found in the reservoirs of the Triassic period. This type of nodosaur didn't grow more than 1 meter in length. The species that gave the detachment its name lived in what's now Italy, Romania, and Switzerland. Their elongated body with a long neck and powerful tail was perfectly adapted for swimming. At the same time, the structure of the ear of these lizards suggests that they perceived sounds coming from above the surface of the water. They fed, like other nodosaurs, on fish and small marine animals. Nothosaurs were among the main marine predators of the early Triassic period, and they competed for the title of the main ocean predator mainly among themselves. Of course, predatory fish, like sharks, were also serious rivals for them. The largest nothosaurs grew up to 6 meters. They lived almost all over the world. The remains of these animals are found in Russia, China, Israel, North Africa, and other regions. Also, in shallow waters, one could meet such creatures as placodonts. In structure, the early representatives of this suborder were more similar to land animals, but gradually their tail acquired a flat shape. The limbs turned into flippers. Some of the 20 known species of placodonts acquired a bony shell. This element made them look like turtles. The largest of the placodonts grew up to 2.5 meters in length. They fed mainly on mollusks and crustaceans, but the real sea battles took place closer to the end of the Triassic period. At this time, in the seas and oceans, nothosaurs were gradually replaced by new reptiles. Ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, both of them changed their land lifestyle to an aquatic one. Both varieties turned out to be ideally adapted to hunting fish and other sea creatures. But the dawn of both varieties came in the next, Jurassic period. Therefore, we'll tell you more about the confrontation between ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs in the next issue. Compared to the previous Permian period, life was simply in full swing in the airspace of the Triassic. Before the Great Permian extinction, only insects were real flyers, and larger animals were just trying to master gliding from tree to tree. Now, not only insects were flying in the air, but also a large number of flying lizards, pterosaurs. Of course, their main food was fish and the same insects, but it's possible that in the struggle for a place in the sun, pterosaurs also fought with each other. Among the most famous flying lizards of the Triassic period, the following species can be distinguished. Eudomorphodon. This primitive pterosaur lived in what's now Italy between 208 and 210 million years ago. Its wingspan didn't exceed 1 meter. It fed mainly on fish. For this purpose, its mouth had 2 types of teeth: sharp fangs closer to the tip of the beak and small triangular teeth at its base. Ostreodactyl. Some scientists consider this pterosaur related to Eudomorphodon, but most researchers distinguish it as a separate genus. As you can understand from the name, it was discovered in Austria. These pterosaurs lived here about 215 million years ago. The wingspan of the Ostreodactyl reached 120 centimeters. It also had a bony crest on its beak and a long tail. Pitinosaurus. The name of this small insectivorous pterosaur is literally translated from Greek as flying lizard. Its wingspan was no more than 60 centimeters. Pitinosaurus belongs to the most common group of pterosaurs, Dimorphodon. This means that it has a pronounced division of teeth by shape and purpose. Only Pitinosaurus had not 2, but 3 types of teeth. Prehendactyl. This was an even earlier and even smaller species of pterosaurs. Its remains were also discovered in Italy, in the Prean Valley. They're about 228 million years old. The wingspan of the Prehendactyl was no more than 45 centimeters. It ate fish and insects. By the way, if we talk about insects, then in the Triassic period, the development of this group of living creatures was very intensive. During the entire period, a large number of species of lacewing appeared. In the middle of the period, Beetles and Hemiptera reached their peak. Dragonflies and mayflies. At the very beginning of the period, there were no land beetles. Although, before the Permian extinction, they were widely represented throughout the planet. At the end of the period, such a large order of insects as Diptera appeared. Hymenoptera insects also appeared. However, during the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, many species of insects disappeared. Titanoptera insects were characteristic of the Triassic period. During this period, they managed not only to appear, but also to die out. To date, scientists know 46 fossil species of these Orthoptera. It's known that these insects were predatory. They developed with incomplete metamorphosis. Now, such a mechanism is typical for dragonflies. Their head in shape and structure was similar to the head of early praying mantises. The front legs were adapted for grasping. Also, unlike other Orthoptera, they were able to make sounds by rubbing one wing against the other in a folded position. The sound apparatus of modern representatives of this superorder is arranged a little differently. It's quite possible that the Titanopterans themselves, like other insects of the Triassic period, served as food for the first frogs. One of the first species of these creatures is considered to be Triassic. This frog, native to Madagascar, had a length of up to 10 centimeters. It's noteworthy that this particular creature is not a direct ancestor of modern tailless ones. The skull of Triassic was wide and similar in structure to modern tailless frogs, but its body was somewhat more elongated due to the larger number of vertebrae. This fossil frog also had a small tail, but the main interest in terms of the confrontation of different species of animals for us is the inhabitants of the land. At the beginning of the Triassic, representatives of the Permian period, synapsids lived out their days. During this time, one could meet such an animal known as Lystrosaurus or Placerius. Also, at the beginning of the Triassic period, a new species of synapsids appeared, Trinaxodon. This small creature lived in burrows and hunted insects and small animals. But it was its descendants who became the winners in the evolutionary race. Trinaxodon was similar to reptiles in many ways, but it already had features inherent in mammals. It and similar animals became a transitional form and gave rise to the development of a group of creatures, which include humans. But the most successful animals by the end of the Triassic period were dinosaurs. And if the animals of the Permian period are the calling card of the corresponding region of Russia, then Argentina can be proud of the study of the Triassic. It was here that the earliest dinosaurs were found. There's also a Triassic park in this country, Talampaya, and some exhibits in this park depict battles between dinosaurs. For example, one of the central compositions of the park is the attack of a Zooposaurus on a large sauropod, a Coloradosaurus. Zoopasauruses lived in South America at the end of the Triassic and the beginning of the Jurassic periods. In their structure, they were classic theropods of medium size. They were distinguished by a long, flexible neck and an elongated, narrow mouth. The body length of these lizards, according to various estimates, ranged from 4 to 6 meters, and their weight could reach 250 kilograms. The first part of the name of the Zooposaurus was taken from the language of one Indian tribe inhabiting this territory. In their language, this was the name for an evil spirit or devil. Accordingly, its name means devil lizard. The name of the Coloradosaurus comes from the area where it was discovered. The remains of this and many other Triassic dinosaurs were found in the Los Colorados Formation in the province of the same name. The Coloradosaurus is a classic long-necked sauropod. Only in the Triassic they had not yet reached such gigantic sizes as in the subsequent periods of the dinosaur age. Its body length was only about 7 meters. Another sauropod dinosaur was discovered in the same area. It received its name in honor of the famous popularizer of paleontology, Donald Lessem. The scientist who discovered it, José Bonaparte, gave it the name Lessemosaurus. The body length of this sauropod could reach 9 meters. Another herbivorous sauropodomorph dinosaur from the Triassic period was discovered in the province of La Rioja. Thanks to this, it was named Riojasaurus. It's one of the earliest sauropods discovered. Its remains are from 210 to 220 million years old. Despite many similarities with later representatives of this group, Riojasaurus has one significant difference. The latest studies of its skeleton have shown that this dinosaur moved not on 4, but on 2 legs. All the sauropods described above could have served as prey for Zooposaurus or its relatives, but in addition to predatory theropods, other large predators lived in Argentina during the Triassic period. In the Talampaya Park, there's a figure of a 10-meter crocodile, Thalassocus. This monster is simultaneously a relative of both crocodiles and dinosaurs. Also in the Triassic period, such creatures as archosaurs were common. They most likely became the ancestors of real dinosaurs. In the Argentine Triassic Park, there's such a unique animal as Lagosicus. Due to its modest size, only 40 to 50 centimeters, it received a name meaning crocodile the size of a hare. At about the same time, another archosaur, Desmatosuchus, lived in the United States. It was up to 6 meters long and 1.5 meters high. This archosaur weighed up to 1 ton. Its back was covered with a bony shell and protected by spikes. It's believed that these creatures became the ancestors of ankylosaurs. Perhaps such armor was necessary to protect against the largest predator of North America at that time, Postosuchus. This predatory archosaur could grow up to 4 to 5 meters in length and up to 3 meters in height. Such a giant could weigh up to half a ton. In addition to Desmatosuchus, its food could have been reptiles such as Trilophosaurus and Typothorax. The first animal resembled a large iguana in appearance and habits. They grew up to 180 to 250 centimeters in length and were herbivorous. Typothoraxes resembled monitor lizards or crocodiles in appearance, but at the same time, they were herbivorous. Their length was about 2.5 meters, and their weight was up to 100 kilograms. As a defense mechanism, Typothoraxes acquired bone armor with small spikes along the sides and at the base of the tail. But such protection wasn't very effective against large predators, and in Scotland, in the period from 227 to 237 million years ago, another primitive archosaur lived, Ornithosuchus. Despite the fact that its name means crocodile bird, it was the main predator of its region. Its length was up to 4 meters, and in the structure of the skull and teeth, it resembled a Tyrannosaurus, or Tarbosaurus. Because of this, it was long considered the ancestor of all tyrannosaurids. The main prey of Ornithosuchus was Hyperopodons. These small rhynchosaurids were found in Europe, Africa, and both Americas. Their body length was up to 130 centimeters. They were herbivorous and fed on seed ferns. For this, they used their large beak. Hyperopodons also had good eyesight and hearing. These tools could also be used to protect themselves from predators. It's believed that the cause of their extinction was the disappearance of a food source, their opponents. Ornithosuchians, like other archosaurs, also did not survive the Triassic-Jurassic extinction. Another carnivorous dinosaur from Argentina of the Triassic period was Eodromius. This small predator was up to 120 to 177 centimeters long and up to 50 centimeters tall. and weighed from 5 to 12 kilograms. In its structure, it was a classic lizard-hipped theropod. It was agile and could run at a decent speed. In fact, its name translates as early runner. A competitor to predators like Eodromius could well have been the Macetognith. This animal, about the size of a modern fox, belonged to the cynodonts, developed synapsids. Such therapsids were warm-blooded and covered with fur. But at the same time, Macetogniths laid eggs. A characteristic feature of these animals was the functional separation of teeth. Macetogniths had 3 types. At the moment, such animals are considered the main ancestors of mammals. This means that over a long period of time, they won the battle for the top of the food pyramid from ancient reptiles. But evolution does not stand still. Therefore, perhaps in the future, reptiles or some other animals will overthrow mammals, and along with them, people, from the throne of the rulers of the planet. Today, our series about the main battles between animals of different eras has come to the famous Jurassic Period. True, most of the dinosaurs shown in Steven Spielberg's films belong to the next one, the Cretaceous. But the Jurassic Period also had its heroes. And in this episode, we'll try to introduce viewers of our channel to their dramatic struggle for survival and leadership in the food chain. Be sure to subscribe to the Age of Dinosaurs channel, and also be sure to leave a like on the videos you like. This will help in promoting our channel according to the platform algorithms. Also, thanks to all your activity, these videos will be able to be seen by other science lovers from different countries. The second period of the Mesozoic began about 201 million years ago and lasted about 56 million years. It got its name from the mountain system located in Switzerland and France. During this period, many geological and climatic changes occurred. About 213 million years ago, the division of the supercontinent Pangaea into modern continents began. Warm, shallow seas formed between the diverging tectonic plates. In the southern hemisphere, the future Africa, Australia, India, and South America were still all together, forming the huge continent of Gondwana. And related animal species of the northern hemisphere were already separated and began to evolve in their own way. For most of the Jurassic period, the climate on the planet was warm and humid. Towards its end, in the equatorial regions, it changed to arid. About 183 million years ago, due to increased volcanic activity, the average air temperature across the globe increased by about 5 degrees Celsius. The amount of rain increased, which began to wash away more and more minerals into water bodies. This, in turn, provoked the rapid proliferation of algae and bacteria that consume oxygen. All this led to the formation of shale rocks, which are formed from organic matter with a deficiency of oxygen. The climate of the Jurassic period contributed to the rapid growth of vegetation. Almost all land was covered with lush forests. The main plants of this time were ferns and gymnosperms. The most common were cycads and ginkgo. In the Jurassic period, these plants grew throughout the temperate zone of the planet. Coniferous trees, similar to modern pines and cypresses, gradually developed the temperate zone of the planet. But in the Jurassic jungles, they played a secondary role. Fern trees also gradually lost their leading positions, and under the canopy of all these thickets, real dramas were played out daily. Each living creature in the struggle for survival used all possible means given to them by evolution. But according to tradition, we'll begin the story of animal battles with the water element. On the ocean floor in the Jurassic period, new hosts appeared, bivalves. They displaced the brachiopods common in the Triassic from their leading positions. Some of the bivalves switched from combing the bottom in search of food to filtering water through their gills. Also at this time, such an ecosystem as coral reefs began to form. Its basis was 6-rayed corals, which appeared in the Triassic. This system exists today in almost the same form as then. However, modern environmental and climatic changes in the foreseeable future may lead to its complete disappearance. The main inhabitants of coral reefs were various ammonites and a new type of cephalopods, belemnites. Belemnites were predatory animals that fed on other, smaller mollusks. Outwardly, they resembled modern squids placed in a full-fledged internal shell. Their shells could reach 3 meters in length and had an elongated cone-shaped shape. They consisted of 3 separate parts. The middle conical chamber of belemnites is called the phragmocone. It grows throughout the life of the mollusk, and at its base is the birth chamber of the belemnite. Along the back of the phragmocone, there was a thin, flat or leaf-shaped protrusion, the prustricum. But the most famous part of belemnites, thanks to which they got their name, was the rostrum. This chamber looks like the tip of a throwing spear. They're the ones that paleontologists most often have at their disposal. Rostra consisted of a denser material and have been well preserved to this day. Also in the Jurassic period, many new species of fish appeared. Among them were sharks, which had already acquired a completely modern appearance. They were much faster and more aggressive than their predecessors. Also, a large number of various turtles and crocodiles lived in salt and freshwater bodies. But the most intense competition for the title of rulers of the seas and oceans in the Jurassic period was contested by 2 types of aquatic reptiles, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. Moreover, both of them left the land for this and went the same way, which was later repeated by modern cetaceans and pinnipeds. Externally, ichthyosaurs were very similar to modern dolphins. They differed only in the shape of the tail and the presence of an additional pair of fins. They had a barrel-shaped body and a long, elongated mouth. This structure suggests that the main food of ichthyosaurs were mollusks and fish. Scientists also believe that ichthyosaurs, like whales, were viviparous. It's difficult to imagine that they could somehow lay eggs. It's noteworthy that these lizards were discovered by an 11-year-old girl, Mary Anning. She discovered a skeleton on the so-called Jurassic coast of England in Dorset in 1811. Her older brother found a fossilized skull, which he mistook for a crocodile skull. This find captivated the girl so much that she began to sort through other stones on the beach and was able to assemble an almost complete skeleton of an unknown creature. This young lover of paleontology is also the discoverer of plesiosaurs and pterosaurs. The name ichthyosaur means lizardfish. It was first used by the German naturalist Carl Dietrich Koenig, but later the skeleton found by Mary Anning was classified as a Temnodontosaurus. According to some estimates, these ichthyosaurs could grow up to 9 to 12 meters and weigh up to 3 tons. To date, scientists have described several dozen species of these lizards that lived all over the world. A plesiosaur discovered later on the same beach was only 3.5 meters long. Now, this species, which gave its name to the entire family, is considered medium-sized. The largest plesiosaurs grew up to 15 to 20 meters. They had a large barrel-shaped body with 4 flippers on the sides. Plesiosaurs also had a long, mobile neck and a small head. The structure and arrangement of their teeth suggests that these lizards fed mainly on fish. It's unlikely that one can seriously consider the possibility of regular battles between ichthyosaurs and classic plesiosaurs, but everything changed dramatically with the appearance of a separate variety of plesiosaurs with a short neck and a powerful mouth. These lizards were called pliosaurs and were classified as a separate genus, and their diet included more than just fish. The largest of them could easily hunt other aquatic lizards. The first pliosaur was also discovered in England and described in 1822. Its length is estimated at 10 to 13 meters, and its weight at 15 tons. The skull of a pliosaur, depending on its species, could be more than 2 meters long. When swimming, these giants used the technique of underwater flight and could develop a decent speed. In combination with a huge mouth and a keen sense of smell, this gave pliosaurs a serious advantage over other aquatic inhabitants. In the airspace of the Jurassic period, no significant changes were observed compared to the Triassic. Pterosaurs still reigned here. These small winged reptiles mainly ate fish. It's unlikely that serious air battles occurred between them. Of the notable events in the air kingdom of that time, one can note the extinction of the Rhamphorhynchus and the appearance of the most famous pterosaurs, pterodactyls. This type of flying lizard was discovered very first, and for many, the word pterodactyl is a synonym for all winged reptiles of the dinosaur era. At first, scientists attributed all the pterosaurs found to this genus, but later, the classification of most of them was changed. It's also still unclear whether all the samples available to researchers belong to different types of pterodactyl. It's possible that some of them are representatives of the same species, but their remains belong to individuals of different ages. The first real birds also appeared in the Jurassic period. For a long time, it was believed that the transitional form between reptiles and birds were the Archaeopteryx. Its discovery became another confirmation of Darwin's theory, but later studies showed that this unique creature belongs to a dead-end branch of development. As always, the main battles of animals took place on land, and as almost the entire era of dinosaurs, the dominant predators on all continents were large theropods. In the early Jurassic period, these were representatives of the megalosaurid family. The remains of these monsters have been found in Europe, North America, and even in Madagascar. Megalosaurus, which gave the name to the family, is the first reliably described dinosaur. The lower part of its femur was found in England in 1676. These carnivorous lizards lived in Europe from 166 to 168 million years ago. Their weight was about 2 tons, and the body length reached 9 meters. Another genus of this family, the Torvosaurs, lived in the United States, Portugal, Germany, Tanzania, and Uruguay. Their remains are 145 to 165 million years old. The body length of the Torvosaurs was about 10 to 12 meters, and their height was up to 4 meters. They weighed about 3.5 to 4.5 tons. Another group of large theropod dinosaurs, the Allosaurids, appeared 155 to 145 million years ago. They were also distributed throughout the world. Along with Coelurosaurids, they lived in the same areas as the megalosaurs, but scientists suggest that representatives of different families occupied different ecological niches and did not compete for food. Allosaurus, which gave the name to the entire family, was not the largest predator of the dinosaur era. Its length did not exceed 8.5 meters. and its height was about 3.5 meters. The average body weight of an adult Allosaurus was about 1.5 tons. Some researchers suggest that individual members of the family could grow up to 11 meters and weigh up to 4 tons. Coelurosaurs are the largest group of theropods. In the Cretaceous period, the most terrible predator of all time, the Tyrannosaurus rex, will eventually appear. This group also includes different types of ornithomimids and maniraptors. All of them are the closest relatives of birds. It's noteworthy that such unique dinosaurs as compsognaths also belong to coelurosaurids. These predators are comparable in size to a chicken, but they, by all indications, are true theropods. Even Antarctica at that time had its own unique theropod, Cryolophosaurus. Its size is estimated at 6 to 8 meters, and its weight is from 500 to 800 kilograms. A distinctive feature of this carnivorous giant was the crest on its head. Unlike many other theropods, the crest of the Cryolophosaurus was located not along but across the skull. Perhaps it served to attract individuals of the opposite sex. As already mentioned, constant battles between representatives of different theropod groups were most likely rare, but the herbivores that lived at the same time had to constantly fight for their lives. The Jurassic period was the heyday of the largest creatures on our planet, sauropods. Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and Brachiosaurus were real giants. For example, the weight of an adult Brachiosaurus could reach 60 tons. Only young or sick individuals could become prey to predators. They descended from an earlier group of dinosaurs called prosauropods. For example, they include such a species as Etonix. It lived in South Africa at the beginning of the Jurassic period. These lizards were not as large as their descendants. Also, it's possible that prosauropods moved not on 4 but on 2 legs or periodically changed their mode of movement. Given their size, adult sauropods could easily eat vegetation from the tops of trees without fear of attack by enemies. Although there are suggestions that some theropods of the Jurassic period were pack hunters. Using the right tactics, 2 to 3 allosaurids could risk attacking even an adult sauropod. Smaller herbivorous dinosaurs had to use different methods of protection. Most likely, the main prey of large predators of that time were stegosaurs and iguanodons. The former were up to 9 meters long and weighed up to 4 tons. There were 2 rows of vertically arranged plates on their backs. They could have served both for protection and for thermoregulation. Another formidable weapon of stegosaurs were the spikes on the tip of the tail. Many fossils of these herbivores bear traces of bites from large predators in the area of the base of the tail and on the hips. And on one of the skeletons of an Allosaurus, a hole has been preserved, presumably pierced by a Stegosaurus tail spike. Iguanodons appeared closer to the end of the period. They were also herbivorous dinosaurs with a small head and a beak-like mouth. Their length ranged from 10 to 13 meters. A distinctive feature of this group of lizards was the presence of a large claw on the big toes of the front paws. There's an assumption that dinosaurs could use it to protect themselves from predators, but perhaps they used this tool to dig up plant roots. Don't forget that herbivorous dinosaurs most likely grazed in large herds. They included representatives of various families. Herds of ungulates in the African savanna look about the same now. There, zebras, giraffes, and various types of antelope graze next to each other. They feed on different types of plants, and each animal contributes to the overall security system. Both now and in the era of dinosaurs, not every predator attack was successful. The result of the arms race between herbivores and carnivores is the achievement of a certain balance, which serves to maintain natural ecosystems in equilibrium. The Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic era became a real era of dinosaur heyday. At that time, a huge number of the most diverse reptiles lived on land, in water, and in the air. Many of them were real giants. They're familiar to us both from documentaries and feature films. Mass culture made them very popular all over the world. And today, we'll tell you about the main confrontations between dinosaurs and their contemporaries. The arms race between carnivores and herbivores once again approached its apogee. But another natural cataclysm ended this stage with another major extinction. By subscribing to our channel, you'll be the first to know about the appearance of new videos we post. And with the help of your likes and comments, it really helps promote our channel to more people. This allows other science lovers to get acquainted with the history of the evolution of different species of animals. The Cretaceous period lasted about 79 million years. It began about 145 and ended about 66 million years ago. The giant continents of Gondwana and Laurasia finally split into the continents we know today. At the same time, the level of the world ocean first rose and then fell. From about the middle of the period, the average air temperature across the planet gradually fell. Ice caps formed at the poles. In some regions, the temperature dropped to +4 degrees Celsius in the winter, but the last 4 to 5 million years have seen a slow warming. In the second half of the period, a real revolution took place in the plant kingdom. Flowering, or angiosperms, appeared. In the forests of the Cretaceous period, oaks, beeches, and magnolias of almost modern appearance were already in full swing, but there was still no grass under them. Scientists associate the evolution of flowering plants with the flourishing of insects. With their help, pollination of angiosperms began to occur. Diatoms have also been known since the Cretaceous period. They're notable for the fact that their skeleton consists of silicone. The remains of these algae are the basis of siliceous slits and other deposits. The marine fauna of the Cretaceous period was also very diverse. It included more than 600,000 families of various animals. For comparison, scientists know only 450,000 families from Devon, which is often called the Age of Fish. At the beginning of the Cretaceous, the main marine predators were pliosaurs. We talked about them in a previous video, dedicated to the battles of animals of the Jurassic period. Among the pliosaurs of the Cretaceous period, which competed both with each other and with other species of marine animals, we can note the Kronosaurus and Dolichoronchops. According to some estimates, the body length of the Kronosaurus could be up to 10 meters long. This giant weighed about 11 tons. The age of the remains found in Australia and Colombia is around 100 to 120 million years old. Scientists also have real evidence of dramatic confrontations of marine animals involving kronosaurs. When analyzing the contents of their stomachs, researchers found that these marine reptiles ate both large and small elasmosaurids, sharks, and even small turtles. The largest prey of these lizards was believed to have weighed about 3 tons. This shows that the Kronosaurs successfully butchered animals that they could not swallow whole. Also, on the skull of a small lizard from the Elasmosaurid family, Vulungosaurus traces of the teeth of this predatory pliosaur were found. It's not surprising, because the teeth of Kronosaurus are similar in shape to the teeth of killer whales or crocodiles, and in size reach 30 centimeters together with the crown. The bite force was also comparable to the jaw strength of modern crocodiles. Dolichoronchops, by all indications, was a fish-eating plesiosaur. Its length didn't exceed 3 meters. It had large eyes and an elongated mouth. This made its muzzle similar to the muzzles of ichthyosaurs. Dolichoronchops lived in the territory of the modern United States in the period from 70 to 93 million years ago. In the seas and oceans of the Cretaceous period, various types of corals, sea urchins, and bivalves continued to develop. A huge number of microorganisms and small-shelled crustaceans also appeared. They were part of the plankton. The shells of many of them had a calcareous structure. Now they form the basis of the bottom sediments of that period. But the real masters of the seas of the Cretaceous period, of course, were the mosasaurids. These giants appeared only in the second half of the period, but it's quite difficult to imagine that someone could offer them worthy resistance. Most likely, only their relatives could pose a danger to them. The mosasaur, which gave its name to the family, became the first of a large number of rulers of the world ocean at the end of the dinosaur era. Subsequently, the remains of mosasaurs were discovered in the Netherlands, the USA, Russia, Belgium, Japan, New Zealand, Antarctica, Africa, and Scandinavia. The largest of them, Hoffmann's mosasaur, grew up to 17 meters in length, but other species were at least 10 meters in size. The mass of these lizards reached 15 tons. Outwardly, these monsters resembled giant crocodiles with flippers instead of legs and a huge mouth full of sharp teeth. But despite being the status of a megapredator, the mosasaur could also become someone's lunch. In 2014, an incomplete skeleton of a small mosasaur with a very interesting history was discovered. The remains found were quite well preserved, and scientists were able to study the contents of its stomach. The mosasaur's last meal was a fish about 1 meter long, but literally immediately after a hearty meal, the lizard became the prey of at least 3 sharks. This is evidenced by the preserved traces of teeth on its bones. Pterodactyloids continued to reign in the airspace, but by the end of the Cretaceous period, they reached truly gigantic sizes. Such lizards as Quetzalcoatlus, Aerotitan, or Hatzegopteryx can be confidently called the kings of the air. The wingspan of an adult was rarely less than 10 meters. Scientists are still debating how such giants could take off. These flying lizards fed on fish, small dinosaurs, and carrion. But at this time, a large number of real competitors of pterosaurs appeared. We're talking about birds. They turned out to be more adapted to changes in living conditions and were able to survive the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction. In the Cretaceous period, such seabirds as Ichthyornis, Hesperornis, and Baptornis appeared. In size and structure, Ichthyornis resembled modern seagulls. Their body length was about 20 centimeters, and their wingspan was 50 centimeters. They weighed from 300 to 600 grams. These birds could dive and survive underwater for a long time without air. Naturally, their main food was fish. They lived on the shores of the seas in modern USA and Europe about 85 to 96 million years ago. Hesperornis and Baptornis were similar to penguins and led a corresponding lifestyle. Hesperornis grew up to 180 centimeters. Their remains have been found in the USA, Russia, and Kazakhstan. They lived in these places about 80 million years ago. It's believed that they mainly lived on the banks of freshwater bodies. They almost had no wings and, naturally, couldn't fly. But these birds swam well and caught fish with their toothed mouths. Earlier Baptornis were not such large fish-eating birds as Hesperornis, but they led a similar lifestyle. However, their legs, in all likelihood, were similar to flippers. The remains of these birds were found in deposits aged 80 to 87 million years in the USA, Canada, and Sweden. Among the flying birds that appeared in the Cretaceous period, we can note the fan-tailed ones, Confuciusornis, Longipteryx, and Iberomsornis. Confuciusornis is a small bird the size of a crow. As you can guess from the name, it was discovered in China. These birds lived here about 120 to 125 million years ago. It's noteworthy that the Confuciusornis has no teeth. Although later and closer to modern birds, Hesperornis and Ichthyornis were toothy. Confuciusornis ate plant seeds and insects. The body length of Longipteryx was only about 15 centimeters. It also lived in China about 120 to 125 million years ago. A distinctive feature of this small bird was its elongated beak, which made up about 60% of its full body length. At the tip of the beak, it had several large, powerful teeth. At first, scientists assumed that it was a tool for catching fish, but later, the stomach contents of one of the fossilized specimens were studied. It turned out that the Longipteryx ate the seeds of gymnosperms. It seems that they used their teeth to extract these seeds from cones. Iberomsornis, which lived at the same time in Spain, was much closer in structure to modern birds. It was a small bird with a body length of only up to 15 centimeters and a wingspan of up to 20 centimeters. Iberomsornis ate insects. At the moment, science doesn't know much about these birds. Researchers have only one specimen, and it's without a skull and wings. But nevertheless, the most dramatic confrontations between animals took place on land. The Cretaceous period saw the heyday of a wide variety of carnivorous and herbivorous dinosaurs. Both acquired a variety of new devices for attack or defense. Of course, the dominant predators on different continents were the largest theropods. The most famous of them is undoubtedly the Tyrannosaurus rex. This predator, which lived in North America, is the hero of a large number of Hollywood blockbusters and documentaries about dinosaurs. Even our channel dedicated several separate episodes to this. Asian herbivores were terrified by the relative of the T-Rex, Tarbosaurus. In Africa lived the Carcharodontosaurus. In South America, Giganotosaurus. All of them walked on two legs and had giant mouths filled with large, sharp teeth. Also, Tyrannosaurids and other large theropods had a powerful short neck. With its help, they could lift and shake the captured prey, causing it even more suffering. Tyrannosaurus and its relatives were most often confronted by the largest herbivores of that time. These were sauropods, stegosaurs, ceratopsians, and many other types of dinosaurs. We talked about sauropods in detail in a previous video. In the Cretaceous period, among these long-necked giants, you can distinguish the Argentinosaurus, Titanosaurus, or Brachiosaurus. If we've already talked about the first two species more than once, then this time we'll dwell on the third one in more detail. Brachiosaurus is notable for the fact that it was discovered in India. The name of this sauropod means heavy-bodied lizard, and in fact, these dinosaurs were simply enormous in size. For example, the tibia of a single specimen is almost a third larger than the same part of the body of an Argentinosaurus. The total length of this giant is estimated at around 37 meters, the height's at 10 to 12 meters, and the body weight is at 95 tons. However, all these estimates are extremely unreliable, since all the specimens were lost, and the final dimensions were determined by a group of enthusiasts based on available photographs. There was even a version that these were not dinosaur bones, but petrified trees. But scientists know quite a bit about other herbivores of the end of the dinosaur era. At that time, a large number of different ceratopsians lived in different parts of the planet. Three-horned dinosaurs with massive frills. It's quite possible that the main predator of all the times, the T-Rex, often confronted Triceratops. Their weight was up to 9 tons, body length up to 8 meters, and height up to 2 to 3 meters. The skull of the largest of the found Triceratops is more than 2 meters long. The weapons of these giants were horns, of which there were many as 3, one on the nose and 2 above the eyes. And if the nasal horn was very small, then the other 2 could grow more than 1 meter in length. Probably they served ceratopsians to protect themselves from predators and even more often for fights with each other. Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurs protect themselves from taller predators with the help of spikes on their backs or strong bone armor. They also had spikes or a bone club on the tip of a mobile long tail. The largest of the armored dinosaurs, North American Ankylosaurs, were 7 meters long and weighed up to 6 tons. Also, in the Cretaceous period, smaller theropods lived on our planet, like velociraptors or oviraptors. The former were agile and fast predators. There's a version that says they hunted in packs and could pose a danger even to the largest herbivores. Their body length was less than 2 meters, and their height was no more than 70 centimeters. Velociraptors were covered with feathers and had large claws on their hind legs. However, in feature films, they're most often shown as a smaller copy of a Tyrannosaurus. Oviraptors lived in Mongolia and were slightly larger, but apparently they were omnivores. Animals that lived near water bodies could not feel at ease either. In the Cretaceous period, giant crocodilomorphs could be found in them, such as Sarcosuchus, Caprosuchus, or Deinosuchus. It's quite possible that semi-aquatic duck-billed dinosaurs, such as the hadrosaur, could often become victims of these monsters. The remains of Sarcosuchus, dating from 93 to 120 million years ago, are found in both Africa and Brazil. they grew up to 9 meters in length and weighed 2 to 3 tons. A slightly later Caprasuchus lived in Niger. According to various estimates, the length of this crocodilomorph ranged from 3 to 6.5 meters. Deinosuchus were contemporaries and neighbors of tyrannosaurs. They're extinct representatives of the alligator family and are close in structure to their modern relatives. Only Deinosuchus grew up to 12 meters and weighed up to 8.5 tons. Such a monster could well have tried to drive away from its pond even a T-Rex that came too close. Initially, the bite force of a Deinosuchus was estimated at about 18 kilonewtons. But later, a group of scientists studied the bite force of 83 adult living modern crocodiles of various species. As a result, it turned out that the strongest jaws belonged to saltwater crocodiles. They slammed shut with a force of almost 16.5 kilonewtons. Having transferred these results to the dimensions of Deinosuchus, the scientists received a figure of 102.8 kilonewtons. Looking at the fauna of the Cretaceous period, one might get the impression that this was the time when huge theropods, crocodilomorphs, and mosasaurs ate all living things around them. But as always in nature, there was a balance of forces back then. In addition to modern birds, the first modern lizards, snakes, and even placental mammals appeared at this time. Among them were both the ancestors of ungulates and the first primates, that is, our immediate ancestors. But who they had to face in the struggle for survival after the extinction of the dinosaurs, we'll find out from the next issue. In the final video of our series about battles between animals of different eras, we'll talk about the Cenozoic era. Since it began relatively recently and has not ended to this day, we won't devote a separate video to each of its periods. After the extinction of the dinosaurs, many interesting events happened in the animal world of our planet. But today, we'll dwell in more detail only on the most significant confrontations of this new round of the evolutionary arms race. By subscribing to the Age of Dinosaurs channel, you'll be the first to know when we release new videos. Also, with the help of your likes and comments, we can expand our channel and reach more viewers in the science community. The Cenozoic era began immediately after the end of the dinosaur era. Today, it's divided into 3 periods: Paleogene, Neogene, and Anthropogenic. In each of them, various climatic and geological changes occurred, and also a wide variety of animal and plant species appeared and disappeared. Let's try to briefly talk about all of them in order. The Paleogene lasted from 66 to 23 million years ago and consisted of 3 epochs: the Paleocene, Oligocene, and Miocene. All this time, the continents continued to move apart. This contributed to the emergence of the Atlantic Ocean. The disintegration of Gondwana and Laurasia by the end of the period made it impossible for living beings to migrate between the continents. After this, the evolution of life in different parts of the planet went its own way for a long time. Almost throughout the entire period, the climate throughout the Earth was warm and humid, but closer to its end, a sharp cooling began. This was especially noticeable in the polar zones. Large accumulations of ice floated in the North Sea, and Antarctica gradually became covered with a solid ice shell. In the Paleogene, green moisture-loving plants grew not only at the equator and in the tropics. They could be found at the latitudes of the modern southern Urals, Kazakhstan, the Caucasus, and Central Europe. At the same time, tree ferns grew mixed with sandalwood, palms, and bananas. Closer to the polar zones, one could find trees typical of today's temperate zones: oaks, myrtles, chestnuts, and cypresses. At the poles themselves, coniferous broadleaf deciduous forests prevailed. After the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, the animal world of the early Cenozoic was not very diverse. The vacated ecological niches were gradually filled by new animals. This happened in all 3 inhabited elements: in water, air, and on land. And by the end of the Paleogene, the most adaptable creatures were birds and mammals. Moreover, at this time, mammals were already actively exploring the seas and oceans. These were the first varieties of sirens, whales, and dolphins. In the middle of the Paleogene, mammals exploring the water space achieved serious success. The terror of all sea creatures was the huge-toothed whales, basilosaurs. The length of basilosaur males could reach 21 meters, and females 18 meters. The elongation of their skeleton occurred due to the increase in vertebrae. At the same time, basilosaurs still retained rudimentary hind limbs up to 60 centimeters long. They had not yet acquired the form of full-fledged flippers or fins. Also, unlike modern toothed whales, they did not have echolocation devices. The relatively small skulls of basilosaurs simply did not have enough space to accommodate them. Their rivals were sharks and other cartilaginous fish that survived the extinction. The most famous sharks that appeared at this time were Striatolamia, Icerolamna, and Paleohypodotus. The genus Striatolamia includes 3 fossil shark species. They grew no more than 3.5 meters in length. Their fossilized teeth and vertebrae are found all over the world. These cartilaginous fish lived in water with low salinity. Scientists include 3 and sometimes 4 genera of extinct mackerel sharks in the genus Icerolamna. Their remains are found both in Europe and Africa, and in Kazakhstan and North America. Paleohypodotus, whose name translates as ancient small-toothed, was discovered almost by accident. A box of teeth was found in one of the U.S. museums, which were collected in the state of Alabama more than 100 years ago. Paleontologist June Ebersole immediately realized that they belonged to a new species of fossil sharks. Moreover, the age of the teeth was approximately 65 million years. Based on this, scientists suggested that these sharks became the main predators of the period of filling the ocean with new life after the end of the dinosaur era. Of the amphibians, frogs, toads, and some species of giant salamanders survived the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction. Reptiles at the beginning of the Paleogene were represented by a few lizards, snakes, turtles, and crocodiles. Land mammals mainly spread in forests and along the banks of reservoirs. At the very beginning of the Paleogene, they were very small. Closer to the middle of the period, they began to divide into predators, proboscideans, ungulates, primates, rodents, and others. Thanks to the separation of the continents, unique creatures lived in different parts of the Earth for a long time. In Australia, marsupials have survived to this day, and in South America, edentates and the first primates appeared. Towards the end of the Paleogene period, giant odd-toed ungulates appeared, brontotheres. These were rhinoceros-like herbivores up to 2.5 meters tall. They lived mainly in North America. In the Old World, their relatives, Embolithers, lived. Later, they were replaced by the so-called Indracotery fauna. Indracoteries were the largest land mammals in the history of the Earth. They grew to almost 5 meters and weighed about 24 tons. There were practically no predators on land that could attack such giants. Therefore, the main fights between land animals occurred in lighter weights. Oddly enough, birds were the terror of ungulates and rodents at that time. But these birds were flightless and ostrich-like, and at the same time, carnivorous creatures. In Europe, Asia, and later in North America, these were gastornis. In Central and South America, Purusarhacids. Some species of these birds grew to be over 2 meters long. They ran fast enough and could stun or kill their prey with one blow. Among mammals, the most common predators were representatives of the Creodont order. Their remains have been found on all continents except Australia and Antarctica. But among modern animals, scientists have not been able to find a single descendant of the Creodonts. This order includes 2 families, comprising a total of 80 genera. There's an assumption that in their ecological niche, they were the dominant predators. The largest of them were up to 2 meters long. They were quite primitive animals. The first researchers who described these animals doubted whether to classify them as placentals or marsupials. They were also distinguished by the unique structure of their jaws. Scientists assume that creodonts could not chew food. Their jaws worked approximately the same way as those of modern crocodiles. They could bite their prey in half, but were not able to completely gnaw it. The Neogene period began just over 23 million years ago. Scientists divide it into two sections, Miocene and Pliocene. During this period, the American continents further moved away from Eurasia. Several faults occurred in northeastern Africa, due to which the Red Sea and the Arabian Peninsula appeared. South America, in the process of its movement, encountered the Nazca tectonic plate. As a result, the Andes were formed. The Himalayas, Cordilleras, mountain ranges of the Crimea, Pyrenees, and other regions also formed in the Neogene. In general, the climate on the planet continued to remain relatively warm, but continued to gradually become colder. During the summer, the ice in the northern seas didn't have time to melt completely. As a result, the North Pole was covered with a multi-meter ice sheet. By the end of the period, the climate acquired pronounced continental features, and at the end of the Neogene, another sharp cold snap occurred. Such climatic changes led to a gradual decrease in the area of forests on all continents. In the northern latitudes, real winters were already raging, and in the equatorial belt, evergreen broad-leaved forests grew. Coniferous trees spread in the temperate and northern latitudes, but in many regions, chestnuts, sequoias, and other more heat-loving plants took root. Another cold snap closer to the end of the period led to the formation of tundra in Europe and North America. Deserts and semi-deserts also formed in tropical regions. The emergence of vast grassy plains led to another round of evolution of ungulates. In the first half of the period, representatives of the so-called Hipparian fauna dominated. Hipparians are the ancestors of modern horses. They were much smaller and differed in structure. It was these animals that were frequent victims of terrible birds, Gastornis and Phorusrhacids. Also at this time, giraffes appeared, who are the ancestors of modern camels and deer. Also in this period, the first participants in one of the main confrontations of the entire era appeared, mammoths and saber-toothed cats. But the main stages of this confrontation occurred in the next period, the Anthropogenic. But the marine fauna of the Neogene boasted a real super predator, the Megalodon. This giant shark, according to various estimates, grew up to 15 meters in length and weighed from between 35 to 47 tons. It's very difficult to accurately determine its dimensions. Since Megalodon, like all other sharks, was a cartilaginous fish, mostly jaws and rare vertebrae have been preserved. To obtain data on the appearance and habits of this shark, scientists simply proportionally increase the modern white shark. The Quaternary Period, or Anthropogene, is named that way because of the appearance of modern man in it. The first hominids began to develop the savannas and walk on two legs much earlier, but man was able to seriously compete with other living creatures relatively recently. The Anthropogene period began a little more than 2.5 million years ago and continues to this day. Most of the period is occupied by the Pleistocene section. It ended only 11,000 years ago, giving way to the Holocene. By the beginning of the Anthropogene, the continents had already occupied their modern positions. In the Quaternary period, the formation of various mountain ranges and other geological features of the planet continued. Due to the periodic advance and retreat of glaciers, the level of the world ocean fluctuated within 100 meters. These processes helped form many northern islands and archipelagos. During the coldest stages of the Ice Age, a layer of ice and snow covered most of Europe, Siberia, and the North American continent. The current Ice Age is now in the stage of another warming. According to scientists, it began about 10 to 15,000 years ago. The next global cooling should begin no later than in 1,000 years. Such temperature swings greatly affected the change in the flora. The constant temperature fluctuations had a particularly strong effect on the changes in the flora of the temperate and polar zones. With the retreat of another glacier from the south to the north, stripes of taiga, steppe, and tundra vegetation appeared. More heat-loving plants once again began to grow in more northern regions. Natural barriers, such as mountain ranges, formed unique islands of southern vegetation in some areas of Europe, Asia, and North America that can now be clearly seen in certain parts of the Mediterranean basin. In the seas, battles for the title of main predators between sharks and cetaceans continued. Relatively recently, basilosaurs yielded the palm to giant sharks, such as Megalodon. In the Quaternary, whales responded by introducing predators such as killer whales. These toothed whales are not only fast and strong, but also highly intelligent. The airspace was eventually left to the birds. In our issues, we've repeatedly talked about giant eagles and the ancestors of modern condors. These predators and their descendants pose a danger not only to other birds, but also to many creatures that walk on the ground, rodents and small ungulates. Throughout the period, various ungulates tried to resist a large number of new successful predators. The terrible birds gradually died out under the onslaught of more advanced competitors, predatory mammals. Various bears, wolves, and most importantly, cats appeared in all regions of the planet. All of them, including the famous saber-toothed cats, successfully hunted horses, bison, and deer. Only in South America could birds and reptiles feel like the main predators for some time. The fauna of Australia and the islands in the Pacific Ocean also developed in its own way. There, snakes, monitor lizards, and even arthropods still pose the greatest danger to all living things. But in the rest of the world, ungulates had to grow horns and learn to run fast. But each of them had their own opponents among carnivores. Wolves began to hunt deer, bears, wild boars, and even elks, and saber-toothed cats, bison, woolly rhinoceroses, and mammoths. Several tens of thousands of years ago, a new player entered the natural arms race: people. Their weapons were not fangs or horns, nor claws or hooves. People turned out to be smarter than animals. They learned to use tools and traps, as well as communicate productively with each other. The Pleistocene fauna didn't have a single chance. Mountains of bones of various animals surrounded the sites of ancient people. Their homes and clothes were made of animal skins, jewelry from teeth, claws, and feathers. People ate almost everything alive they could reach. In combination with abrupt climate changes, this led to the extinction of a huge number of living creatures all over the planet. People in the struggle for a place in the sun actively fought among themselves. First, the Cro-Magnons destroyed their main competitors, the Neanderthals. Then they began to divide into tribes and states, continuing to kill each other for resources and land. Now, battles between different species of animals continue on all continents. Lions, tigers, leopards, wolves, and bears hunt zebras, buffaloes, antelopes, and deer. Sharks and killer whales attack fish, whales, and each other. Eagles, condors, and owls attack rodents, lizards, and snakes. But all these fights seem frivolous in comparison to the global confrontation between man and nature. People don't only just destroy animals, they actively destroy or rebuild the entire world around them. At the same time, it's unlikely that humanity will be able to successfully resist the global forces of nature in the form of the greenhouse effect and the subsequent onset of another ice age. Without realizing it, people only accelerate these processes with their activities. As a result, it may happen that humanity will help nature in the destruction of our civilization, and life on Earth, forgetting about people, will continue its eternal struggle between different species of living creatures for survival and supremacy in the water, air, and on land. We thank everyone who watched our video all the way to the very end. If you're interested in this topic, we advise you to pay attention to previous videos on our channel dedicated to the Permian period and the era of dinosaurs. Our channel also has videos about the evolution of a wide variety of living organisms from different periods of life on Earth. There's also videos about the development of humanity and the relationship between people and wildlife. Thanks for watching.